Sometimes the hardest journeys aren't in miles, but in years of silence. In the canyons of New Mexico, rancher Elias Thorne has lived alone for 2 decades, carrying the weight of words unspoken and a family torn apart by pride. One afternoon, a stray German shepherd blocks his path and refuses to let him pass. The dog's desperate behavior leads Elias to a crashed wagon below the cliffs, where he finds his estranged brother dead and a small boy clinging to life. In his brother's pocket, a letter that changes everything. A dying man's final plea for forgiveness and a request to raise the son he left behind. But can a man who couldn't forgive learn to love again? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The sun rose over the Sangre de Cristo Mountains the way it always did, painting the canyon walls in shades of amber and rust. Elias Thorne stood on the porch of his ranch house, a tin cup of coffee cooling in his weathered hands, watching the light creep across the land his family had worked for 3 generations. The silence was complete except for the wind moving through the pinon pines and the distant call of a red-tailed hawk circling above the mesa. He was 62 years old, and most mornings he felt every one of those years in his joints and bones. The ranch stretched across 2,000 acres of high desert country, beautiful and unforgiving in equal measure. It wasn't the biggest spread in Rio Arriba County, but it was his, earned through decades of hard work and harder choices. Inside the house, on the small desk near the kitchen window, sat a worn leather journal. Elias had kept it for 15 years, ever since Doc Martinez had suggested he write things down as a way to keep his mind sharp. The entries were practical, mostly. Cattle counts, weather observations, notes about fence repairs and water levels in the stock tanks. But between the mundane records, there were other lines, written late at night when the silence pressed too heavy. Saw a family of mule deer by the north pasture today. Made me think about how some creatures are meant to stay together and how I've spent half my life alone by choice. Or another birthday. 61. Nobody to share cake with except Remington, and he prefers oats. Elias drained the last of his coffee and set the cup on the porch rail. The day's work wouldn't wait for an old man's reflections. He had 20 head of cattle in the upper pasture that needed checking, and the water line to the south tank had been running weak for a week. He pulled on his hat, a battered resistor that had seen better decades, and walked toward the barn. Remington was already waiting by the fence, a big sorrel gelding with a white blaze and knowing eyes. The horse was 12 years old, steady and reliable, the kind of animal you could trust with your life on narrow canyon trails. Elias had raised him from a foal, and in all that time, the horse had never put a foot wrong. "Morning, old friend," Elias said, running his hand along Remington's neck. The horse nickered softly and nudged his shoulder. I know. You're ready to get moving." He saddled the gelding with practiced efficiency, his hands moving through the familiar motions without thought. Blanket, saddle, cinch, bridle, everything had its place, its order. Structure was what kept a man going when there wasn't much else to hold on to. The isolation hadn't always been his choice. 20 years ago, Elias had a brother named Jacob, younger by 4 years, and they'd worked this ranch together after their father passed. The old man had left the property to both of them equally, assuming his sons would continue the partnership that had sustained 3 generations of Thorns. For a while, they did. For a while, it worked. But Jacob had different ideas about the future. He wanted to sell off portions of the land for development, to capitalize on the growing interest in high desert properties from wealthy people in Santa Fe and Albuquerque. Elias refused. The land wasn't just property to him. It was legacy, responsibility, sacred trust. Their arguments grew heated and frequent, and finally, on a cold November morning, Jacob had packed his truck and driven away. "You're going to die alone on this worthless dirt," Jacob had said, his voice shaking with anger. "And when you do, there won't be anyone to care or even notice." Elias had shouted back, words he'd regretted every day since. "Then go. I don't need you. I don't need anybody." That was the last conversation they'd had. 20 years of silence that had hardened into something that felt permanent, unchangeable. Elias had heard through the occasional rumor that Jacob had moved to Colorado, that he'd married, that he'd had a son. But he'd never reached out, and neither had Jacob. Pride was a powerful thing. It could keep a man warm on cold nights, but it was poor company. The ride out to the upper pasture took 40 minutes, following a trail that wound through stands of juniper and across dry creek beds. Elias knew every rock and turn, every place where the path narrowed or the footing got tricky. He'd ridden this land since he was 6 years old, first behind his father on a big bay mare, then on his own pony, and finally on horses he'd trained himself. The cattle were where they should be, grazing near a natural spring that never ran dry even in the worst droughts. He counted heads automatically, checking for any signs of injury or illness. Everything looked good. The calves born this spring were growing strong, and the older cows showed no signs of stress. Satisfied, he turned Remington back toward the ranch. The town of Tres Piedras was an hour's ride to the east, a small community of maybe 400 people where everyone knew everyone else's business. Elias made the trip twice a month for supplies, and sometimes he'd stop by Doc Martinez's clinic or the general store just to exchange a few words with another human being. He wasn't antisocial exactly. He just didn't see the point in forcing relationships that felt hollow. Doc Martinez was probably the closest thing Elias had to a friend. The old physician, nearly 70 himself, had delivered half the babies in the county and patched up the other half when they got into trouble. He'd been the one to pronounce Elias's father dead 10 years ago, and he'd been the one to sit with Elias afterward, not saying much, just being present in the way only a person who understands grief can be. "You're going to turn into a hermit," Doc had told him once, during one of Elias's rare visits to town. "Human beings weren't meant to live in complete isolation, Elias. We need connection, even the stubborn ones like you and me." Elias had nodded but hadn't changed his ways. What was the point of connection when it could be severed so easily, when pride and anger could turn brothers into strangers? Sarah Chen, who ran the general store, was kinder in her approach. She was in her 50s, a widow who'd moved to New Mexico from California 20 years ago and decided to stay. She always had a kind word for Elias, always asked about the ranch and the cattle, and never pried into his personal life. When he came in for supplies, she'd have his usual order ready: coffee, flour, beans, salt, sugar, and a few cans of peaches that he allowed himself as a small luxury. "You look tired, Elias," she'd said during his last visit. "Are you taking care of yourself out there?" "Well enough," he'd replied. "Ranch doesn't run itself." "No," she'd agreed, "but it doesn't require you to sacrifice your entire life to it either. You ever think about hiring some help, even part-time?" He'd considered it over the years, but never acted on it. Bringing someone else onto the property felt like admitting he couldn't handle things alone, and admitting weakness had never been Elias Thorne's way. The sun was high when he returned to the ranch house. He unsaddled Remington, brushed him down, and turned him into the corral with fresh water and hay. The rest of the afternoon passed in the usual rhythm, checking the water line, which needed a new coupling he'd have to order from town, mending a section of fence near the south boundary, and splitting firewood for the coming winter, even though winter was still months away. By evening, he was back on the porch with another cup of coffee, watching the light drain from the sky. The canyon walls turned purple, then black, and the stars emerged one by one, so many that they looked like spilled salt across velvet cloth. This was the time of day when the silence felt heaviest, when the absence of voices and laughter pressed against him like a physical weight. He thought about Jacob more often than he cared to admit. He wondered if his brother had been happy in Colorado, if he'd built a good life, if he'd been a better father than they'd had. Their old man had been hard, emotionally distant, the kind of father who showed love through work and discipline rather than words. Maybe that's where Elias had learned to do the same. Maybe that's why he'd let pride destroy the one family connection he had left. Inside the house, he heated a can of stew on the propane stove and ate it standing at the counter, staring out the window at nothing. The leather journal sat on the desk, but tonight he didn't open it. What would he write? Another day like all the others, another sunset witnessed alone, another night of wondering if Jacob's angry prediction had been right after all. He cleaned the pot and spoon, checked the doors and windows out of habit, and climbed the stairs to his bedroom. Sleep came easier now than it had when he was younger, probably because the work tired him more than it used to. But even in sleep, the dreams came. Dreams of his father teaching him to ride. Dreams of working alongside Jacob in the early morning cool. Dreams of the family they'd been before everything fell apart. Tomorrow, he'd ride the canyon trail to check on the line shack near the western boundary. It was a monthly routine, necessary but lonely, a 6-hour ride through some of the most beautiful and isolated country in New Mexico. The line shack was barely more than 4 walls and a roof, a place where a cowboy could wait out a storm or spend the night if he got caught out after dark. Elias kept it stocked with basic supplies, more out of tradition than necessity. The canyon trail was narrow in places, winding along cliff edges where one wrong step could send horse and rider tumbling into oblivion. But Elias had ridden it hundreds of times and trusted Remington completely. It was peaceful out there, away from even the minimal human contact of the ranch headquarters. Out there, a man could think, or not think, as he chose. He fell asleep with the window open, letting the cool desert air wash over him, carrying the scent of sage and dust and the vast emptiness that had become his life. He didn't know, couldn't know, that tomorrow the canyon trail would lead him to something that would shatter his carefully constructed solitude and force him to confront everything he'd spent 20 years trying to forget. In the darkness, the leather journal sat closed on the desk, waiting for the entry that would mark the day everything changed. But Elias slept, dreamless for once, gathering strength for the journey that would teach him the hardest lesson of all. That some distances can be measured in miles, but the hardest ones to cross are measured in years of silence and the terrible weight of words left unsaid. The morning started like any other. Elias rose before dawn, made his coffee, and stood on the porch watching the world wake up. The air was crisp, carrying that peculiar clarity that comes with high altitude and low humidity. He drank his coffee, slowly, savoring it, then saddled Remington for the ride to the western boundary. The canyon trail began a mile from the ranch house, a narrow track that climbed into the broken country where the mesas gave way to deep ravines and weathered rock formations that looked like ancient cathedrals. It was beautiful in a stark way. The kind of beauty that didn't apologize for being harsh or demand anything from you except respect. Remington moved with his usual steady gait, picking his way carefully over loose stones and around prickly pear cactus. The morning sun warmed Elias's back as they climbed higher, following the trail along a ridge that offered views for 50 miles in every direction. Hawks circled overhead, riding the thermals, and somewhere in the distance, a coyote called out, its voice echoing off the canyon walls. They'd been riding for about 2 hours when Elias first saw the dog. It appeared suddenly on the trail ahead, a large German shepherd with a dusty coat and alert ears. The dog stood directly in the center of the narrow path, watching them approach with an intensity that was immediately unsettling. Elias pulled Remington to a stop about 20 feet away. "Easy now," he murmured to the horse, who tensed beneath him. He called out to the dog, "Hey there, boy. You lost?" The dog didn't move. It just stood there, staring at them, and then it started to whine. Not a casual sound, but a desperate, high-pitched keening that made the hair on Elias's neck stand up. "Come on now," Elias said, trying to keep his voice calm. "Move along. We need to get past." The dog whined louder and took a step forward, then back, as if trying to communicate something it couldn't put into words. When Elias urged Remington forward, trying to move around the animal, the dog's behavior became frantic. It rushed at them, barking sharply, then retreated, then rushed forward again. Remington sidled nervously, clearly uncomfortable with the dog's erratic movements. Elias tightened his grip on the reins, speaking softly to settle the horse. "Whoa, easy, easy now." He tried to guide Remington to the left, planning to give the dog a wide berth and continue past. But the moment he did, the German shepherd lunged forward and grabbed his pant leg in its teeth, pulling hard. "Hey!" Elias jerked his leg back instinctively, but the dog held on, growling now, its teeth locked in the heavy denim. "Let go, damn it!" The dog pulled harder, dragging at him with surprising strength, trying to pull him off the horse toward the right side of the trail, toward the cliff edge. Remington snorted and danced backward, spooked by the attack. Elias had no choice. If the horse bolted or threw him on this narrow section of trail, it could be fatal for both of them. He swung down from the saddle quickly, keeping one hand on the reins to steady Remington while the dog continued to pull at his leg. All right, he said, trying to keep his balance. Let go and I'll follow you. Is that what you want? The moment he spoke those words, the dog released his pant leg and immediately turned toward the cliff edge, whining urgently. It looked back at Elias, then toward the edge again, then back at Elias. The meaning was unmistakable. Elias's heart began to pound. He tied Remington's reins to a sturdy juniper branch, giving the horse enough lead to move but not enough to wander. Then he followed the dog carefully toward the edge of the cliff, his boots crunching on loose gravel. When he reached the rim and looked down, his breath caught in his throat. 50 feet below, resting on a narrow ledge that jutted out from the cliff face, was a wagon. It had gone over the edge and crashed there, one wheel shattered, the bed twisted at an unnatural angle. 2 horses lay dead in their traces, and sprawled near the wagon's splintered seat was a man. Even from this distance, Elias could see that the man wasn't moving. Jesus, he whispered. He looked at the dog, who whined again and pawed at the ground, desperate, pleading. How long have you been trying to get help, boy? The descent was treacherous. There was no proper trail, just a series of natural ledges and handholds in the rock face. Elias had climbed worse in his younger days, but he wasn't young anymore, and one slip would mean a fall that his body wouldn't recover from. Still, he didn't hesitate. Someone was down there, maybe alive, maybe not, but he had to know. He went down slowly, testing each foothold before committing his weight to it. The dog watched from above, whining continuously. Loose stones skittered away beneath Elias's boots, falling into the void below the ledge. His hands found cracks and projections in the rock, and he moved with the careful deliberation of a man who understood that haste could kill him. It took 15 minutes to reach the ledge. When he finally dropped the last few feet onto the broken ground beside the wagon, he was breathing hard, his hands scraped and bleeding. He straightened and turned toward the man lying near the wagon, and then the world stopped. The face was older, weathered by sun and time, but Elias would have known it anywhere. Would have known it in the dark, would have known it across any distance. Jacob, his brother, lay on his back, his eyes closed, his shirt soaked with blood from a wound on his head. But his arms were wrapped around something, holding it close to his chest even in death. A small boy, maybe 5 or 6 years old, unconscious but breathing. Elias dropped to his knees beside them, his hands shaking so badly he could barely function. He touched Jacob's neck, feeling for a pulse he knew wouldn't be there. The skin was cool. He'd been dead for hours, maybe days, but the boy was warm. The boy was alive. "Oh God," Elias whispered. "Oh God, Jacob, what happened here?" He gently extracted the child from Jacob's arms, laying him carefully on a flat section of the ledge. The boy's breathing was shallow but steady, his face pale beneath the dirt. There were no visible injuries except for some bruises and scrapes. Jacob had protected him in the fall, using his own body as a shield. Elias's vision blurred with tears he hadn't shed in decades. He looked at his brother's face, seeing the younger man he'd argued with 20 years ago, seeing the kid who'd followed him around the ranch, asking endless questions, looking up to his big brother like he was some kind of hero. His hand went to Jacob's jacket pocket, searching automatically for identification. His fingers found paper, folded several times. He pulled it out and opened it with trembling hands. The envelope was addressed in Jacob's handwriting, Elias Thorne. Inside was a letter, also in Jacob's hand, the writing shaky, hurried. "Elias," it began, "I'm sick and I have no one else. The cancer's in my lungs and liver. The doctors give me maybe 3 months. My wife passed 2 years ago and there's no family on her side. Please raise my son and teach him to be a better man than I was. I was coming home to say I'm sorry. I'm sorry for everything, for leaving, for the things I said, for wasting 20 years we could have spent as brothers. Please forgive me. Please take care of Samuel. He's all I have in this world, and now he's all you have too. Don't let our pride kill another generation. I'm sorry I won't be there to see the man he becomes. Love, Jacob." Elias read the letter 3 times, the words blurring together as tears ran down his face unchecked. 20 years of silence ended like this. 20 years of stubbornness and pride, and now his brother was dead on a canyon ledge, and in his arms a nephew Elias had never known existed. Above them, the German shepherd barked once, sharp and commanding. Elias looked up and saw the dog looking down at him, waiting. The child stirred slightly, making a small sound. Elias folded the letter carefully and put it in his own pocket. Then he gathered the boy gently in his arms, feeling the small body settle against his chest. "I've got you," he whispered. "I've got you now, Samuel. I've got you." The climb back up the cliff face carrying a child seemed impossible, but impossible wasn't a choice anymore. Elias Thorne had spent 20 years living in the prison of his own making. His brother's final act had been to crash through those walls and show him what really mattered. The hardest part wasn't the climb. The hardest part was knowing that forgiveness had been waiting for him all along, and he'd been too proud to reach for it until it was too late. The climb back up the cliff face took every ounce of strength Elias had left. He made a sling from his shirt, securing Samuel against his chest so his hands would be free for the climb. The boy remained unconscious, his small body limp and trusting. The German shepherd watched from above, barking encouragement or warning. Elias couldn't tell which. Twice his boot slipped on loose. Rock, and his heart stopped, his fingers digging into stone until his knuckles went white. But he kept climbing, driven by something deeper than fear or exhaustion. This child was all that remained of Jacob, all that remained of family. Failure wasn't an option. When he finally hauled himself over the rim, he collapsed onto solid ground, gasping, his arms shaking from effort. The dog immediately rushed over to Samuel, sniffing him anxiously, whining when the boy didn't respond. Then it looked at Elias with those intelligent eyes, as if to say, "Now what?" "Now we get him to Doc Martinez," Elias said, his voice hoarse. He got to his feet slowly, every muscle protesting. Remington stood where he'd left him, calm and patient. Elias fashioned a better sling, then mounted carefully, settling Samuel in front of him. The boy's head lolled against his chest. "Come on," he called to the dog. "You're coming too." They made the ride back to town in half the usual time, Remington responding to the urgency in Elias's signals, moving faster than was safe on the rocky trail, but never stumbling. The German shepherd loped alongside them, tireless, despite what must have been days of standing watch over the child. Tres Piedras was quiet when they arrived, the afternoon heat keeping most people indoors. Elias rode straight to Doc Martinez's clinic, a small adobe building at the edge of town with a faded red cross painted on the door. He dismounted awkwardly, holding Samuel, and kicked the door with his boot. Doc Martinez, I need you." The door opened immediately. Doc Martinez was a compact man with silver hair and sharp eyes that missed nothing. Those eyes widened when he saw what Elias was carrying. "Inside, quickly," he said, holding the door wide. "Put him on the examination table." Elias laid Samuel down gently. The boy looked impossibly small on the white sheets, his face dirty and pale, his breathing shallow. Doc Martinez moved with practiced efficiency, checking pulse, breathing, pupils, running his hands carefully over the child's body, checking for injuries. "What happened?" he asked without looking up. Elias told him. The words came out broken, disjointed. The dog on the trail, the crashed wagon, Jacob's body, the letter. Everything spilled out in a rush he couldn't control. Doc Martinez's hands never stopped moving, but Elias saw the tightening around his eyes, the way his jaw clenched. When Elias finished, the old doctor was quiet for a moment, still examining the child. "Dehydration," he finally said. "Exposure. Shock, but no serious injuries that I can find. Your brother saved his life in that fall." He looked up at Elias. "I'm sorry about Jacob. I truly am. How long before he wakes up? Could be hours. Could be longer. His body's been through trauma. It needs time." Doc Martinez straightened, wiping his hands on a towel. "You said there was a dog outside. German shepherd. He's the one who led me to them. Smart animal. Probably saved this boy's life twice. Once in the fall, and again by finding you." He studied Elias carefully. "What are you going to do, Elias?" "What do you mean?" "With the boy. With Samuel." Doc Martinez's voice was gentle but direct. You've been alone for 20 years. You've built your whole life around that isolation. Now you're responsible for a 5-year-old child who just lost his father and doesn't know you exist. That's not going to be easy." Elias looked down at Samuel's sleeping face. The boy had Jacob's nose, his chin, but the eyes, when they opened, would probably be his mother's. A woman Elias had never met, never would meet. "Jacob asked me to raise him," he said quietly. "In the letter, he asked me to teach him to be a better man than he was." His voice broke. "How do I say no to my brother's last wish? I'm not suggesting you should. I'm just making sure you understand what you're taking on." Doc Martinez moved to the sink, washing his hands. "Children need more than food and shelter, Elias. They need patience, attention, consistency. They need love. When's the last time you loved anything besides that ranch?" The question hit harder than Elias expected. When had he last loved anything? Or anyone? The answer was obvious and painful. 20 years ago, before he'd let pride turn his heart to stone. "I don't know if I remember how," he admitted. "Then you'll have to learn again," Doc Martinez said. "For his sake and yours." A sound from the table made them both turn. Samuel's eyes fluttered open, unfocused and confused. He looked around the strange room, at the strange man standing nearby, and his face crumpled. He tried to sit up, panicking. "Papa," he said, his voice cracking. "Where's Papa?" Elias moved to the table without thinking, his hand going to Samuel's shoulder. "Easy now. You're safe. You're in a doctor's office, and you're going to be fine. I want my papa." Samuel's eyes were filling with tears. "Where is he?" "He was holding me. I remember he was holding me." Elias looked at Doc Martinez, who gave him a small nod. This was his responsibility now, his burden and his chance. He sat on the edge of the examination table and took Samuel's small hand in his. The boy's fingers were cold despite the warm room. "Samuel," he said gently, "my name is Elias Thorne. I'm your papa's brother, your uncle. There was an accident with the wagon." He paused, searching for words that wouldn't be a lie but wouldn't destroy what was left of this child's world. "Your papa was hurt very badly. He made sure you were safe, but he couldn't stay. He asked me to take care of you now." Samuel stared at him, trying to process information that was too big, too terrible for a 5-year-old mind to hold. "Papa's dead?" "Yes," Elias said softly. "I'm sorry." The boy's face twisted and he started to cry, deep sobs that shook his small frame. Elias did the only thing he could think of. He gathered Samuel into his arms and held him, feeling the child cry against his chest, feeling the pain and loss pour out in waves. Over Samuel's head, he met Doc Martinez's eyes. The old doctor nodded again, approval and encouragement mixed together. Outside, through the window, Elias could see the German shepherd lying in the shade of the porch, head on his paws, watching the door, waiting. In Samuel's pocket, Elias's hand brushed against something hard. He pulled it out carefully. It was a small wooden horse, beautifully carved, worn smooth from handling. On the bottom, burned into the wood, were the initials J.T. Jacob had made it. For his son, the same way he'd made one for Elias when they were children, before everything fell apart. Elias held the crying child and the wooden horse and felt the first crack in the armor he'd built around his heart over 20 years of loneliness. The hard part was just beginning. The sun was setting when Elias loaded Samuel and the dog into his truck. Doc Martinez had given the boy a thorough examination and declared him physically sound, though emotionally fragile. He'd written out instructions for care, diet, and things to watch for. He'd also pulled Elias aside with a warning. "He's going to have nightmares. He's going to cry for his father. He's going to test you in ways you can't imagine. Children process grief differently than adults. Be patient. Be present. Don't try to replace Jacob. Just be there when the boy needs you." Elias had nodded, pocketing the instructions like they were a map to territory he'd never explored. The drive back to the ranch was quiet, except for the rumble of the truck engine and the occasional whine from the dog, who sat in the truck bed with his head over the side, watching the landscape pass. Samuel sat in the passenger seat, small and lost in the space meant for a grown person. He'd stopped crying, but his eyes were red and empty. He held the wooden horse in both hands, turning it over and over, as if the repetitive motion could somehow bring his father back. "Are you hungry?" Elias asked. I have food at the ranch. I can make you something. Samuel shook his head without speaking. You need to eat something. Doc Martinez said so. I want to go home, Samuel said, his voice barely above a whisper. Elias didn't know how to respond to that. Home was gone. Home was a father who died protecting his son. Home was a life that had ended on a canyon ledge. We'll figure it out, he said finally, one day at a time. The ranch house looked different when they arrived, as if the simple act of bringing a child home had changed its essential nature. It was no longer a bachelor's refuge. It was going to have to become something else, something Elias didn't know how to create. He showed Samuel to the spare bedroom upstairs, a room that had stood empty for years except for storage. It smelled of dust and disuse. There was a bed with a bare mattress, a dresser with empty drawers, and a window that looked out over the eastern pastures. I know it's not much, Elias said awkwardly. Tomorrow we can go to town and get you some proper things. Sheets, blankets, clothes, whatever you need. Samuel stood in the doorway, not entering as if crossing the threshold would make everything real and final. The dog pushed past both of them and jumped onto the bed, circling twice before settling with a satisfied grunt. Samuel looked at the animal, and for the first time since waking up, something like emotion crossed his face. What's his name? He asked. I don't know. He was with you and your papa. Did your father call him anything? Soldier, Samuel said quietly. Papa said he was a soldier because he was brave and loyal and never gave up. Soldier, Elias repeated. That's a good name. A strong name. He paused. Did Soldier sleep in your room at your old house? Samuel nodded. Then I guess he sleeps here now, Elias said, if that's all right with you. The boy finally stepped into the room and went to the bed, sitting beside the dog. Soldier immediately put his head in Samuel's lap, and the child's small hands went to the animal's fur, fingers tangling in it like an anchor. Elias backed out of the room, giving them space, feeling awkward and useless. Downstairs, he stood in the kitchen and tried to figure out what a 5-year-old would eat. He had beef stew in cans, but that seemed too heavy. Eggs? Children ate eggs, didn't they? He scrambled 3 eggs and made toast, putting it all on a plate and carrying it upstairs. Samuel was lying on the bare mattress with Soldier curled against him. The boy's eyes were closed, but Elias could tell he wasn't sleeping. The wooden horse was clutched in one hand. I brought food, Elias said. Just eggs and toast. Simple. Samuel opened his eyes but didn't move. You need to eat something, Elias tried again. Your body needs fuel to heal. I'm not hungry. Elias set the plate on the dresser. It'll be here if you change your mind. He hesitated in the doorway. Samuel, I know this is hard. I know you're scared and sad and confused, but I'm going to do my best to take care of you. That's what your papa wanted, and I'm not going to let him down. You didn't even know him, Samuel said, his voice muffled against Soldier's fur. Papa said you and him didn't talk anymore. He said you were angry at him. The words were like a knife. Elias gripped the doorframe, steadying himself. That's true, he said after a moment. We didn't talk, and I was angry, but I was wrong, Samuel. I was wrong about a lot of things, and now I can't fix it with your papa. But I can fix it with you. I can be the uncle he wanted me to be. He paused. I can try, anyway. Samuel didn't respond. After a long moment, Elias pulled the door partially closed and went back downstairs. The night was the longest of his life. He tried to sleep but couldn't, listening for sounds from upstairs, wondering if Samuel was sleeping, if the boy was crying, if he should go check on him or leave him alone. Around midnight, he heard footsteps on the stairs. He got up quickly and found Samuel standing in the kitchen, small and ghost-like in his dirty clothes. Can't sleep? Elias asked gently. Samuel shook his head. In the dim light from the lamp, Elias saw he'd been crying again. His face was blotchy and his eyes were swollen. Sometimes it helps to have warm milk, Elias said. That's what my mother used to make me when I was your age and couldn't sleep. He heated milk on the stove, added a touch of honey, and poured it into a mug. Samuel took it with both hands and sipped carefully. Can I ask you something? The boy said after a while. Anything. Why were you and Papa angry at each other? Elias pulled out a chair and sat down, suddenly exhausted. How did you explain pride and stubbornness to a 5-year-old? How did you make a child understand that adults could be foolish and petty and waste precious years on resentment? We had a disagreement about this ranch, he said slowly, about what should happen to it after our father died. Your papa wanted to sell parts of it. I wanted to keep it all. We both thought we were right, and we both refused to compromise. So instead of working it out, we stopped talking to each other. That's stupid, Samuel said. Elias almost smiled. Yes, it was very stupid. Probably the stupidest thing I've ever done. Papa said he was sorry. In the letter? Yes, he said he was sorry. And I am too. Samuel finished the milk and set the mug down. I found something in my pocket, he said. He pulled out a small locket on a chain. It was Mama's. Papa put it with my things before we left. He opened it, showing Elias 2 tiny photographs. One was Jacob, younger and smiling. The other was a beautiful woman with kind eyes. That's Mama, Samuel said. She died when I was 3. I don't remember her very much. Papa said she was the best person he ever knew. Elias looked at the photographs, at his brother's face frozen in a moment of happiness, and felt the weight of all the lost years pressing down on him. I'm sure she was, he said quietly, and I'm sure she'd be proud of you for being so brave. Samuel closed the locket and held it tight. Will you tell me about when you and Papa were kids? Yes, Elias said. I'll tell you everything I remember, but maybe tomorrow, when we're both less tired. Right now, let's get you back to bed. He walked Samuel upstairs and tucked him into the bed with Soldier. The dog had never left the boy's side, and Elias silently thanked whatever providence had put that animal on the trail at the right moment. Uncle Elias, Samuel said as he was leaving. Yes? Thank you for finding us. Elias's throat tightened. Thanks, Soldier. He's the real hero. But as he closed the door and stood in the dark hallway, he knew the truth. The real hero was Jacob, who'd used his last moments of consciousness to protect his son, and who'd had the courage to reach out across 20 years of silence, knowing he might be rejected, but asking anyway. Forgiveness had arrived wrapped in tragedy, and Elias Thorne was going to spend the rest of his life earning it. The first week was harder than Elias imagined anything could be. He'd faced drought, cattle disease, broken bones, and years of loneliness, but nothing had prepared him for the challenge of caring for a grieving 5-year-old child. Samuel barely spoke. He ate when told to eat, went to bed when told to sleep, but there was no light in his eyes. He moved through the days like a small ghost, the wooden horse always in his hand, Soldier always at his side. Sometimes Elias would find him standing at windows, staring out at the landscape as if waiting for his father to appear on the horizon. Elias had to learn everything from scratch. How much did a child eat? What time should he go to bed? What did you do when he had nightmares, which he did every single night, waking up screaming for his papa? Elias would rush to his room, not knowing if he should hold him or leave him alone, settling for sitting on the edge of the bed and speaking in what he hoped was a calming voice until the sobs subsided. On the 3rd day, he took Samuel to town. Sarah Chen met them at the door of the general store, her face full of sympathy. Word had spread quickly about Jacob's death and Elias's sudden guardianship. "Oh, you poor dear," she said, crouching down to Samuel's level. "I'm so sorry about your papa. He must have been a very good man to raise such a brave boy." Samuel didn't respond, just pressed closer to Elias's leg. Sarah straightened, meeting Elias's eyes. "What do you need?" "Everything," Elias admitted. "Clothes, bedding, toys. I don't even know what size he wears." Sarah took charge with the efficiency of someone who'd raised 3 children of her own. She measured Samuel, gathered clothes in his size, picked out sheets with cowboys and horses on them, selected books appropriate for his age. She added coloring books and crayons, a stuffed bear, a box of toy cars. "Does he like to read?" she asked Elias. "I don't know." "Does he have any hobbies, things he likes to do?" "I don't know." Sarah's expression softened. "You're going to have to learn, Elias. You're going to have to ask him questions and pay attention to the answers. Children aren't cattle. They need more than food and shelter." It was the 2nd time someone had told him that. The words stung because they were true. He'd spent 20 years caring for animals and land. He had no practice in caring for a human being, especially one so small and wounded. She rang up the purchases and then added a book to the pile. "This is for you," she said. "Parenting Guide. It's basic, but it'll help." Elias took it, feeling both grateful and embarrassed. He was 62 years old and needed a book to tell him how to raise a child. That evening, after a silent dinner of chicken and potatoes that Samuel picked at without interest, Elias sat on the porch while Samuel played half-heartedly with the toy cars on the living room floor. Soldier lay beside him, ever vigilant. Doc Martinez pulled up in his old Chevy truck, climbing out with a package in his hands. "How's the boy?" he asked, settling into the chair beside Elias. "Quiet, sad. I don't know how to reach him. Give it time. Grief has its own timeline. You can't rush it or fix it. You can only be present for it." He handed Elias the package. "These came for you. Jacob's things from Colorado. The sheriff up there sent them after I contacted him about the accident." Elias took the package with reluctant hands. It was small, surprisingly light, everything his brother had owned, reduced to what could fit in a box a foot square. "You should go through it with Samuel," Doc Martinez said. "Might help him to see his father's belongings, to touch things that were important to Jacob." After Doc left, Elias brought the box inside. Samuel looked up from his cars when Elias sat down on the floor beside him. "This came from your old house," Elias said gently. "Your papa's things. Would you like to look through it together?" Samuel nodded slowly, setting down the toy car. Elias opened the box carefully. Inside were clothes, a wallet with $7 and a driver's license, a pocket watch that had stopped at 3:15, and a worn harmonica wrapped in a handkerchief. Samuel's hand shot out, grabbing the harmonica. "Papa played this," he said, his voice stronger than it had been in days. "Every night before bed. He'd play me songs." "I know," Elias said softly. "He learned from our father. When we were kids, Jacob would practice for hours until he got every note right. He was better at it than I ever was." "Can you play?" "Not well, but I remember a few songs." Elias took the harmonica carefully, wiping it on his shirt. He put it to his lips and played a simple melody, rusty and imperfect. "Oh, Susanna," their father's favorite. Samuel listened intently. When Elias finished, the boy said, "That's not how Papa played it." "No, your Papa was much better than me. Will you try to learn, so you can play it the way Papa did?" Elias looked at the child's earnest face and felt something shift in his chest. This was connection. This was a thread between them, fragile but real. "I'll try," he promised. "I'll practice every day if you want me to." "I want you to." Samuel picked up the pocket watch, turning it over in his small hands. "Why did it stop?" "Sometimes when something gets damaged, it stops working. But maybe we can get it fixed. Maybe we can get it running again." Samuel looked at him with those serious eyes. "Can everything be fixed?" Elias understood the real question beneath the words. "Can I be fixed? Can you be fixed? Can this broken situation ever become whole?" "I don't know," he said honestly. "But I think we can try. I think if we work at it together, we can fix a lot of things that are broken." That night, Elias sat on the edge of Samuel's bed and played the harmonica again. He was terrible at it, missing notes and losing the rhythm, but Samuel listened without complaining. When he finished, the boy was almost asleep. "Uncle Elias," Samuel murmured. "Yes. Will you tell me a story about Papa? From when he was little." Elias thought back across the years, past the anger and silence to the memories he'd tried so hard to bury. "When your Papa was about your age, maybe a little older, he found a baby coyote that had been abandoned by its mother. Our father said to leave it alone, that wild things should stay wild. But Jacob snuck out at night and bottle-fed that coyote until it was strong enough to survive on its own. What happened to it? It left eventually. Went back to the wild where it belonged. But for months it would come to the edge of the property at sunset, and Jacob would go out and sit with it. They'd just be together, boy and coyote, until the stars came out. Then the coyote would disappear into the desert, and Jacob would come back home. Papa always loved animals," Samuel said sleepily. "He said they understood things that people forget." "He was right about that," Elias said. He looked down at Soldier, who was already on the bed, pressed against Samuel's side. "Your Papa sent you with the best animal I've ever known. Soldier saved your life. Twice." "I know," Samuel whispered. "Papa told him to protect me right before everything went dark. He said, 'Soldier, protect the boy.' And Soldier did." Elias's vision blurred. He stood up quickly, clearing his throat. "Get some sleep. Tomorrow I'll teach you how to feed the chickens. Would you like that? Okay. It wasn't much. It wasn't a breakthrough, but it was something. A small connection, a thread of trust beginning to form between a man who'd forgotten how to love and a boy who desperately needed to be loved. Outside, the stars were coming out, the same stars that had watched over generations of thorns. Elias sat on the porch with the harmonica in his hands, practicing the simple melody over and over, each attempt slightly better than the last. Somewhere out in the desert, a coyote called, its voice echoing off the canyon walls. Elias liked to think it was the same one Jacob had saved all those years ago, still keeping watch over the land where it had learned that not all humans were dangerous, that some could show kindness even when it wasn't required. He played the harmonica until his lips were sore, and then he played some more. 2 weeks passed, then 3. The sharp edges of grief didn't disappear, but they began to dull slightly, worn smooth by the rhythm of daily routines and small acts of care. Elias learned Samuel's patterns, that he woke early like most ranch kids, that he was left-handed, that he hated peas but would eat green beans, that thunderstorms scared him but he was fascinated by lightning. Samuel learned things too. He learned that Uncle Elias was quiet but not unkind, that he kept his promises, that he never raised his voice even when frustrated. He learned the names of all 20 cattle in the herd, learned to scatter feed for the chickens, learned to brush Remington's coat until it gleamed. The ranch became a classroom where grief and healing happened simultaneously. Elias taught Samuel to ride, first on Remington with Elias behind him, then on a gentle mare named Daisy that had belonged to the neighboring ranch. Sarah Chen's nephew had outgrown her, and she'd suggested the horse might be perfect for Samuel. Keep your heels down, Elias instructed as Samuel sat in the saddle, his small hands gripping the reins. That's it, and sit up straight. The horse can feel if you're nervous. I'm not nervous, Samuel said, but his knuckles were white on the leather. That's my boy, Elias said, the words slipping out naturally. Samuel glanced back at him, and something flickered in those serious eyes. Not happiness, not yet, but something close to it. They rode together most afternoons, short trips at first, then longer. Soldier always loped alongside them, tireless and vigilant. Elias pointed out landmarks, told stories about the land, explained how to read the weather in the clouds and the behavior of birds. One afternoon, while sorting through old papers in his father's desk, Elias found a hand-drawn map tucked between account ledgers. It was on yellowed paper, the ink faded but still legible. The handwriting was Jacob's, unmistakable even after all these years. He'd made it when he was maybe 10 years old, mapping the ranch with a child's eye for detail. There was the secret fort near the western boundary, a formation of rocks that looked like a castle if you had imagination. The swimming hole, by the creek that only ran in spring. The treasure tree, a massive cottonwood where they'd buried a box full of toys and pennies. Papa's best fishing spot. The place where we saw the mountain lion. Elias stood at the desk, the map trembling in his hands, seeing his childhood and Jacob's rendered in careful lines and enthusiastic annotations. They'd been explorers together once, adventurers in their own kingdom. When had they stopped seeing the world through those eyes? He brought the map down to the kitchen where Samuel was coloring at the table. Soldier lay beneath, creating a warm cave of fur around the boy's feet. I found something, Elias said. Something your papa made when he was a kid. Samuel looked up, interest sparking. Elias spread the map on the table, smoothing the creases carefully. Papa drew this? Samuel traced the lines with one finger, following the crude but loving representation of the ranch. He did. We used to spend whole summers exploring. This was our kingdom, and we knew every inch of it. Elias pointed to the secret fort. This was our favorite place. We'd pack sandwiches and spend all day there, pretending we were cowboys fighting off bandits. Can we go there? Samuel asked. To the secret fort? Yes, Elias said. Yes, we can go there tomorrow if you want. Samuel's face transformed. It wasn't quite a smile, but it was close. Will you tell me more stories about you and Papa? So Elias did. He sat at the table while Samuel colored and told him about the time Jacob fell in the stock tank trying to catch a frog. About the summer they built a treehouse that collapsed the first time they climbed into it. About the winter they got snowed in and built an army of snowmen around the house. Papa used to tell me stories too, Samuel said quietly, but not about when he was a kid. He didn't talk about that much. He probably had his reasons, Elias said, though the words hurt. Jacob had cut himself off from his own history, from the good memories along with the bad, because the pain of what he'd lost had been too great. He said his family broke apart. That's what he told me, that sometimes families break and you can't fix them. Elias felt the weight of those words settle on him. He was wrong about that. Families can break, but they can also heal. It just takes time and effort and the willingness to try. Is that what we're doing? Healing? I think so. Or trying to, anyway. That night, after Samuel was asleep, Elias sat at his desk and opened the leather journal. He hadn't written in it since the day before he'd found Samuel. He picked up his pen and wrote 3 weeks with Samuel. Learning to be an uncle. Learning to be a father. Learning that walls I built to keep pain out also kept love out. Jacob sent me a gift I didn't deserve but will spend my life earning. Today we found his old map. Tomorrow we explore his childhood places. Maybe in finding his past, we can build Samuel's future. The next morning dawned clear and cool. They packed a lunch, saddled the horses, and rode toward the western boundary with Soldier ranging ahead. Samuel held the map, comparing the faded drawing to the real landscape, calling out when he recognized features. The secret fort was still there, the rocks weathered but unchanged. They tied the horses and climbed up into the natural formation. From the top, you could see for miles in every direction. Papa stood here, Samuel said with certainty. Right where I'm standing, many times, Elias confirmed. This was his favorite spot. He said you could see the whole world from up here. Samuel was quiet for a long moment, looking out at the endless sky and rugged terrain. Then he said, Uncle Elias, do you think Papa can see us? From heaven or wherever he is? Elias considered the question carefully. I don't know for certain, but I like to think he can. I like to think he's watching and seeing that you're safe and that you're learning to be at home here. Do you think he's happy? That you're taking care of me instead of being mad at him? I think Papa knew I would take care of you. That's why he was coming here. He trusted me even after 20 years. That's a powerful thing, Samuel. That's forgiveness. Elias paused. And yes, I think he's happy. I think he's at peace knowing you're where you belong. This is where I belong, on this ranch, if you want it to be. This is your home now, same as it's mine, same as it was your papa's once. Elias put his hand on Samuel's shoulder. You're a thorn. This land is in your blood. Samuel looked down at the map, at his father's childish handwriting marking out adventures and discoveries. Can we find the treasure tree? Do you think the box is still there? Only one way to find out. They spent the afternoon following Jacob's map like it was a treasure chart. They found the cottonwood, massive and ancient, its roots digging deep into the earth, and there, in a hollow at its base, wrapped in a rotted cloth bag, was a rusted metal box. Samuel opened it with shaking hands. Inside were the remnants of childhood treasures. Toy soldiers green with corrosion, a pocket knife with a broken blade, a handful of pennies, and a folded piece of paper. The paper fell apart when Samuel touched it, but they could make out a few words in Jacob's young handwriting. Jacob and Elias, brothers forever. Samuel looked up at Elias with tears in his eyes. He wanted you to be brothers forever. We were, Elias said, his own voice rough. We just forgot for a while, but that doesn't change what we were to each other. Nothing can change that. Samuel carefully put the rusted toys back in the box and closed it. Can we leave it here, for other kids to find someday? That's a fine idea. They reburied the box, and Samuel placed a rock on top to mark the spot. As they rode back to the ranch in the golden afternoon light, Elias felt something settle in his chest. Not happiness exactly. Not yet, but something like contentment, something like purpose. That evening, after Samuel went to bed, Elias took out the harmonica and played O Susanna all the way through without a mistake. It had taken him 3 weeks of practice, but he'd done it. From upstairs, he heard Samuel's voice call out, "That was good, Uncle Elias. That was really good." Elias smiled in the darkness. Small victories, small connections. Day by day, they were building something new from the ruins of what had been broken. The healing, had begun. The letter arrived on a Tuesday morning, 6 weeks after Elias had found Samuel on the canyon ledge. It came in an official-looking envelope with a return address from the Colorado Department of Human Services. Elias stared at it for a long moment before opening it, a cold dread settling in his stomach. Samuel was at the kitchen table, eating oatmeal and reading a book about horses that Sarah Chen had given him. Soldier lay at his feet, ever present. The scene was so normal, so domestic, so much like what Elias had never allowed himself to imagine having. And now this envelope threatened to take it all away. He opened it with unsteady hands. "Mr. Thorne," it began, "we are writing to inform you of an open investigation regarding the welfare and guardianship of Samuel Jacob Thorne, minor child. As per Colorado state law, when a child crosses state lines into the care of a non-custodial adult following the death of their legal guardian, Child Protective Services must conduct a formal investigation to ensure the child's safety and well-being. A caseworker will be visiting your residence within the next 2 weeks to assess the living situation and your suitability as a guardian. Please be prepared to provide documentation of your relationship to the child, your financial stability, and your living arrangements. Until this investigation is complete and formal guardianship is established through the court system, the child's placement with you is considered temporary and may be subject to change." The letter continued with lists of required documents and legal procedures, but Elias couldn't focus on the words. His hands were shaking. They could take Samuel away. They could decide Elias wasn't suitable, that a 62-year-old bachelor rancher with no parenting experience wasn't the right guardian for a traumatized 5-year-old, and they could place him in foster care with strangers. "Uncle Elias, are you okay?" Elias looked up to find Samuel watching him with concerned eyes. The boy had gotten better at reading his moods over the past weeks, had learned to sense when something was wrong. "I'm fine," Elias said, trying to keep his voice steady. "Just some mail from Colorado. Nothing to worry about." But Samuel's face went pale. "About me? Are they going to make me leave?" Elias folded the letter quickly. "No, nobody's making you leave. This is just paperwork, legal things that have to be sorted out. That's all." "But Papa's letter," Samuel said, his voice rising. "He said you should take care of me. He wanted me to stay with you." "I know, and that's what's going to happen. I promise." Even as he said it, Elias wondered if it was a promise he could keep. He called Doc Martinez as soon as Samuel went outside to help feed the chickens. The old doctor listened quietly as Elias read him the letter. "This was always going to happen, Elias," Doc said gently. "You're not Samuel's legal guardian. Jacob's wishes don't matter in the eyes of the law if they're not documented properly. Did he have a will? I don't know. His belongings didn't include one. Then legally, Samuel is a ward of the state until a court determines otherwise. They have to investigate. They have to make sure he's in a safe, stable environment." Doc paused. "Are you? Am I what?" "Safe and stable. This ranch is isolated. You're unmarried, elderly by their standards, with no experience raising children. On paper, you probably look like a risk." The words hit like physical blows. "I've been taking good care of him. He's happy here, or as happy as a child can be after losing his father. Doesn't that count for something?" "Of course it does. But you need to be prepared for questions, Elias. Hard questions. Why did you and Jacob not speak for 20 years? Do you have a support system? Can you afford to raise a child? What are your plans for his education, his health care, his future?" Doc's voice softened. "I'm not saying this to scare you. I'm saying it so you're prepared. These caseworkers, they're good people doing a hard job. They want what's best for Samuel. You need to show them that what's best for Samuel is being here with you." After hanging up, Elias sat at the kitchen table for a long time, staring at the letter. He'd been so focused on learning to care for Samuel day by day that he hadn't thought about the legal complexities. In his mind, Jacob's letter had been enough. His brother had asked him to raise Samuel, and Elias had accepted that responsibility. He'd assumed that was the end of it. But the world didn't work that way. The world required documentation, procedures, investigations. The world didn't care that Elias had already fallen in love with the boy, that he'd started imagining futures that included teaching Samuel to rope cattle and watching him grow up and someday handing him the deed to this ranch. The world could take all of that away with a single decision. That night, Elias couldn't sleep. He stood at Samuel's door, watching the boy sleep with Soldier pressed against his side. 6 weeks ago, this room had been empty storage. Now it was covered with Samuel's drawings, his books, his toys. The wooden horse sat on the nightstand. The locket with his mother's picture hung on a nail by the bed where Samuel could see it first thing every morning. This was home now for both of them. The caseworker arrived 10 days later, earlier than Elias had expected. Her name was Linda Morrison, a woman in her 40s with kind eyes and a professional demeanor that reminded Elias of a veterinarian examining livestock. Thorough, detached, looking for problems. She spent 2 hours at the ranch. She inspected Samuel's room, asked about his daily routine, his health, his emotional state. She interviewed Samuel privately while Elias waited outside, his heart pounding. She reviewed financial documents, medical records, references from Doc Martinez and Sarah Chen. "Mr. Thorne," she said finally, sitting at the kitchen table with her notes spread before her, "I can see that you care for Samuel. That's obvious. But caring isn't enough. This child has suffered tremendous trauma. He needs stability, structure, professional support. He needs to be enrolled in school, to have access to counseling, to be part of a community." "He has community here," Elias protested. "Everyone in town knows him. Doc Martinez checks on him regularly. Sarah Chen treats him like her own grandson. You live an hour from town. Samuel has no children his age to play with. You work full-time running this ranch. Who watches him during the day? What happens if you get injured or sick? You're 62 years old, Mr. Thorne. Have you considered what happens to Samuel if something happens to you?" Elias felt his defense crumbling. "I'm healthy. I'm strong. I can work this ranch for another 20 years. Maybe, but maybe not. And the state has to consider worst-case scenarios." Linda Morrison's voice gentled. "There's a foster family in Denver. They're experienced. They have other children Samuel's age. They're only 30 minutes from an excellent trauma counselor. They could provide him with everything he needs. Everything except family," Elias said hoarsely. "Except blood. Except connection to his father and his history. Family isn't just blood, Mr. Thorne. Family is care and commitment and providing what a child needs to thrive." She closed her folder. "I'll be honest with you. If this was 6 months ago, I'd recommend placement with the foster family immediately. But Samuel is clearly attached to you. Removing him now would cause additional trauma, so I'm recommending a provisional arrangement with strict conditions." "What conditions?" "Enroll him in school this fall. Get him into regular counseling sessions. Complete a parenting course. Have regular home visits from my office. Establish a legal guardianship through the court system. And most importantly, develop a backup plan. If something happens to you, who takes Samuel? You need to have that documented and legally binding." She stood, gathering her papers. "You have 3 months to meet these conditions. If you do, I'll recommend permanent guardianship. If you don't, I'll have to consider other placement options. This isn't punishment, Mr. Thorne. This is about protecting a child who's already lost too much." After she left, Elias sat on the porch, his head in his hands. Samuel came and sat beside him, Soldier between them. "Is she going to take me away?" Samuel asked in a small voice. "Not if I can help it," Elias said. "But we have some work to do. We have to prove to them that this is where you belong." "It is where I belong," Samuel said with certainty. "Papa knew it. That's why he was bringing me here." Elias looked at the boy, at the trust in those eyes, and felt the full weight of responsibility settle on his shoulders. It wasn't enough to love Samuel. He had to be worthy of that love. He had to build a life for this child that would pass the scrutiny of caseworkers and judges and bureaucrats. He had 3 months to prove he could be the guardian Jacob believed he could be. 3 months to transform from a solitary rancher into a father. 3 months to save the only family he had left. Elias attacked the caseworker's conditions with the same determination he'd applied to every challenge in his life. He created lists, made appointments, researched options. The difference was that this time, failure meant losing Samuel. That was unacceptable. The parenting course was held in Taos, an hour's drive each Saturday for 6 weeks. Elias sat in a room full of young couples and single parents, feeling ancient and out of place. The instructor, a woman half his age, taught them about attachment theory, positive discipline, emotional regulation. Elias took notes like he was studying for a final exam, because in a way, he was. Children need consistency, the instructor said. They need to know what to expect, to feel safe in their routines, especially children who've experienced trauma. Elias thought about the routines he'd established with Samuel. Morning chores, afternoon rides, evening stories, harmonica practice before bed. The wooden horse always within reach. Were they enough? Were they the right kind of structure? He raised his hand, feeling self-conscious. What if the child seems happy but doesn't talk much about his feelings? How do you know if he's really okay? The instructors smiled. Children often show their emotions through behavior rather than words. Pay attention to how he plays, whether he's sleeping well, if he's engaged with activities, and give him permission to feel whatever he's feeling without judgment. Elias took notes, writing, "Permission to feel. No judgment. Watch behavior, not just words." Finding a counselor was harder. Most of the therapists in the area had long waiting lists, and many were reluctant to take on a client who lived so far from town. Finally, Doc Martinez connected him with Dr. Elena Vargas, a child psychologist in Española who specialized in trauma and grief. "I can see Samuel twice a month," she said during their initial phone call. "That's a long drive for you, but I think the consistency will be important." "We'll make it work," Elias said. Samuel's first session was difficult. He didn't want to go, didn't want to talk to a stranger about his papa, didn't see the point. Elias sat in the waiting room, anxious and uncertain, wondering if he was doing the right thing. When Samuel emerged after an hour, his eyes were red from crying, but Dr. Vargas seemed satisfied. "He did well," she told Elias. "This is going to be a process, but he's a strong kid. He has good support at home. That matters more than anything else." The school question was more complicated. The nearest elementary school was in Tres Piedras, small but well regarded. Elias enrolled Samuel for the fall semester, meeting with the principal and Samuel's assigned teacher, Mrs. Rodriguez, a kind woman in her 50s who reminded him of Sarah Chen. "Samuel's been through a lot," Elias explained. "He lost his father only 2 months ago. He's living with an uncle he barely knew. He might need extra patience." Mrs. Rodriguez nodded. "We'll watch him closely. And Mr. Thorne, I want you to know that being nervous about this doesn't make you a bad guardian. It makes you a good one. You care enough to worry." The first day of school arrived with the late August. Heat. Samuel was quiet during breakfast, pushing his eggs around the plate. He wore new clothes, had a new backpack, new supplies. Everything was ready except his willingness to go. "I want to stay home," he said. "I can learn here. You can teach me." "I know you're scared," Elias said gently, "but you need to be around other kids. You need friends your age, people who understand what it's like to be 5 years old. I can teach you about cattle and horses, but I can't teach you how to be a kid. What if they don't like me? Then they're fools. But I think they will like you. You're smart and kind and brave. Any kid would be lucky to have you as a friend." Samuel reached for the wooden horse, which he'd planned to bring with him. Then he stopped, looking at Elias. "Maybe I should leave this here. So it's safe." Elias understood what the gesture meant. Samuel was trying to be brave, trying to leave behind his security object as a sign that he was growing up. But Elias remembered what the parenting instructor had said about not pushing too hard, about letting children set their own pace. "Or," Elias said carefully, "you could bring it. Keep it in your backpack for when you need it. There's no shame in holding on to something that matters to you." Samuel's relief was visible. He tucked the horse into his backpack and stood up. "Okay, I'm ready." The first week was hard. Samuel came home quiet and exhausted, overwhelmed by noise and structure and the presence of so many other children. But slowly, things improved. He made a friend, a boy named Miguel who loved horses too. He brought home drawings and simple worksheets that Elias hung on the refrigerator with magnets. One afternoon, 3 weeks into the school year, Samuel came home with a project. "We're making family trees," he explained. "We have to draw our family and write about them." Elias's heart sank. Samuel's family tree would be sparse. Mother dead, father dead, No siblings, no grandparents, just Elias. But when Samuel showed him the finished project the next week, Elias had to turn away to hide his emotion. Samuel had drawn a tree with strong branches. At the roots, he had written Grandpa Thorn and Grandma Thorn, even though he'd never met them. On the main trunk, Papa Jacob, with a star beside it, and on two of the main branches, Uncle Elias and me. But there were other names too, smaller branches labeled Doc Martinez, Sarah Chen, Mrs. Rodriguez, Miguel, and Soldier. Samuel had created a family from the community that had embraced him, from the connections he'd built in just 3 months. "Is this okay?" Samuel asked anxiously. Mrs. Rodriguez said family doesn't have to be just blood relatives. She said family can be anyone who takes care of you and loves you. "It's perfect," Elias managed to say. "It's absolutely perfect." The lawyer Elias hired to handle the guardianship petition was named Robert Chen, Sarah's son, who practiced family law in Santa Fe. He was efficient and direct, reviewing Elias's situation with a professional eye. "You've done everything right," Robert said during their meeting. "You've met all the caseworkers' conditions. You have strong community support. The question is whether the judge will believe a 62-year-old single man can provide what a young child needs long-term. What can I do to convince them? Tell the truth. Show them who you've become over these past months. Show them that Samuel is thriving, not just surviving." Robert paused. "And be prepared for hard questions. They'll ask about your age, your health, your backup plan. They'll ask why you and Jacob didn't speak for 20 years. They'll question your judgment and your capacity." "I understand." "Do you?" "Because they might also ask Samuel. They might ask him if he wants to stay with you or if he'd prefer to live with a younger family, with other children, with more opportunities. Can you handle it if he says he wants to leave?" Elias felt his chest tighten. "He won't say that. Are you sure? He's 5 years old. He might see other families at school. Families that look different from yours. He might wonder what it would be like." Robert's expression softened. "I'm not trying to be cruel. I'm preparing you for the worst-case scenario." The guardianship hearing was scheduled for the first week of October, 3 months almost to the day after Elias had found Samuel on that canyon ledge. As the date approached, Elias felt anxiety gnawing at him constantly. He couldn't eat, couldn't sleep, spent his nights lying awake imagining every way it could go wrong. Samuel sensed his worry. "Uncle Elias, what happens if the judge says no?" They were sitting on the porch, watching the sunset paint the canyon walls. Soldier lay between them, his head on Samuel's lap. "Then we appeal. We fight. We don't give up." Elias looked at the boy. "Samuel, if you could choose, if you could live anywhere with anyone, what would you want?" Samuel didn't hesitate. "Here, with you. This is my home now. Even though I'm old and don't know how to braid hair or help with homework or any of the things a proper parent should know. You know how to make me feel safe. You know how to tell me stories about Papa. You know how to play the harmonica even though you're not very good at it yet." Samuel smiled slightly. The first real smile Elias had seen in days. "And you're getting better. I think Papa would be proud of how hard you're trying." "I hope so," Elias said quietly. "I hope wherever he is, he knows I'm doing my best." "He knows," Samuel said with certainty. "I can feel it." The day before the hearing, Elias rode out to the canyon with Samuel. They went to the secret fort, climbed up into the rocks, and sat looking out over the land that had been home to 3 generations of Thorns. "Whatever happens tomorrow," Elias said, "I want you to know something. These past 3 months have been the most important of my life. You've taught me things I thought I was too old to learn. You've shown me that walls I built can come down, that love isn't something you lose the ability to feel. You've made me remember what it means to be part of a family." "You taught me things too," Samuel said. "You taught me that it's okay to be sad about Papa, but still be happy about new things. You taught me that family can be built, not just born. You taught me that mistakes don't have to last forever if you're willing to fix them." They sat in silence for a while, watching the hawks circle overhead. Then Samuel said, "Tomorrow, when we go to the courthouse, can I bring the wooden horse?" "Yes. And I'll bring the harmonica. We'll bring the things that connect us to your Papa, and we'll show them that we're honoring his memory by building something good from something broken." The sunset turned the sky orange and purple and red. Father and son sat together in the secret fort, gathering strength for the battle ahead, knowing that tomorrow would determine whether they could continue building the family they'd both learned to need. The Rio Arriba County Courthouse was a modest adobe building that had stood for 70 years, witness to births and deaths, marriages and divorces, crimes and pardons. Elias had been there maybe 3 times in his life, always for minor business. Today felt different. Today, everything that mattered was at stake. He wore his best clothes, a suit he'd bought 30 years ago for his father's funeral and hadn't touched since. It smelled of mothballs and felt too tight across the shoulders. Samuel wore new clothes too, dress pants and a button-up shirt that Sarah Chen had picked out. The wooden horse bulged in his pocket. Soldier had been left at home with Doc Martinez's wife, much to Samuel's distress. Robert Chen met them outside, briefcase in hand. Remember what we discussed. Answer questions directly and honestly. Don't volunteer information they don't ask for. And Elias, let them see who you really are. Don't try to be someone you're not. The courtroom was smaller than Elias expected. Judge Patricia Cordova sat behind the bench, a woman in her 60s with silver hair and sharp eyes that reminded Elias of a hawk. Linda Morrison, the caseworker, sat at one table with a state attorney. Robert and Elias sat at another. Samuel sat beside Elias, swinging his legs nervously, unable to reach the floor. This is a guardianship hearing for Samuel Jacob Thorne, minor child, Judge Cordova began. Mr. Thorne, you're petitioning for permanent legal guardianship. Is that correct? Elias stood. Yes, Your Honor. And you understand that guardianship means full legal responsibility for this child. Medical decisions, educational choices, financial support, everything a parent would provide? Yes, Your Honor. I understand. Be seated. The judge looked over her glasses at the assembled documents. Ms. Morrison, what does the state recommend in this case? Linda Morrison stood. Your Honor, the state has concerns but also recognizes the complexity of this situation. Mr. Thorne has made significant efforts over the past 3 months to meet our conditions. However, questions remain about the long-term suitability of the placement given Mr. Thorne's age, his isolated living conditions, and his lack of parenting experience. What are the alternative options? We have a foster family in Denver willing to take Samuel. They're experienced, have 2 other children close to his age, and live in a suburban area with excellent schools and easy access to services. Judge Cordova made a note. Mr. Chen, call your first witness. Robert stood. The petitioner calls Dr. Francis Martinez. Doc Martinez made his way to the witness stand, moving with the careful deliberation of his age. He was sworn in and sat down, his weathered hands folded in his lap. Dr. Martinez, Robert began. How long have you known Elias Thorne? 40 years, give or take. I delivered half the babies in this county, and I've patched up the other half when they got into trouble. Known Elias since he was a young man. In your professional opinion, is Mr. Thorne capable of raising a child? Doc Martinez looked directly at the judge. When Samuel first came to live with Elias, I had doubts. Elias is set in his ways, likes his solitude, never had kids of his own. But these past 3 months, I've watched him transform. He takes Samuel to counseling appointments an hour away, never misses one. He enrolled him in school, shows up for every parent-teacher meeting. He learned to cook meals a kid will actually eat. He plays that harmonica every night, even though it sounds like a dying cat, because Samuel's father used to play it. A few people in the courtroom chuckled softly. Even Judge Cordova's expression softened slightly. More than that, Doc continued. I've watched Samuel transform too. When he first arrived, he was traumatized, silent, withdrawn. Now he talks, he smiles. He's making friends at school. That doesn't happen in a bad environment. That happens when a child feels safe and loved. Thank you, Dr. Martinez. Robert turned to the state attorney. Your witness. The state attorney stood. Dr. Martinez, Mr. Thorne is 62 years old. What happens if he becomes ill or incapacitated? Who cares for Samuel then? Same thing that happens in any family. The community steps in. Samuel has people who care about him, not just Elias. That's what small towns do. We take care of our own. But legally, there should be a plan. Legally, sure. But in practice, that boy won't ever be without someone to look after him. I guarantee it. Robert called Sarah Chen next. She testified about how Elias came to the store every week now, how he asked for advice about raising a child with genuine humility, how Samuel had become part of the community fabric. "He's not the same man he was 3 months ago," Sarah said. "Loss changed him once, made him close off, but love changed him again, opened him back up. That takes courage at any age, but especially at his." Then it was Elias's turn. He walked to the witness stand on unsteady legs, feeling every one of his 62 years. The oath he took felt sacred, binding. Robert asked him to explain how he came to have custody of Samuel, and Elias told the story. The dog on the trail, the crashed wagon, his brother's body, the letter asking forgiveness and begging him to raise Samuel. "Why didn't you and your brother speak for 20 years?" the judge asked, interrupting. Elias swallowed hard. This was the question he'd been dreading. "Pride, Your Honor. Stupid, stubborn pride over a piece of land. My father left the ranch to both of us, and we disagreed about its future. Instead of working it out, we let it fester. We let pride turn brothers into strangers. And you think you're qualified to raise a child when you couldn't even maintain a relationship with your own brother?" The words stung because they were fair. "No, Your Honor. I'm not qualified. I'm a 62-year-old bachelor who spent 20 years alone because I was too proud to forgive. But my brother's last act was to forgive me anyway, to trust me with his most precious gift. He believed I could be better than I was. And Samuel believes it too." His voice cracked. "I can't undo the past. I can't get those 20 years back. But I can honor my brother's faith in me by being the guardian he believed I could be." Judge Cordova studied him for a long moment. "We'll take a 15-minute recess. When we return, I'd like to speak with Samuel privately in my chambers." Elias's heart sank. This was what Robert had warned him about. The judge would ask Samuel where he wanted to live, and a 5-year-old's answer could determine everything. The 15-minute recess felt like 15 hours. Elias sat on a bench outside the courtroom, his hands clasped between his knees, staring at the floor. Robert sat beside him, reviewing notes but offering no false reassurances. They both knew everything depended on what Samuel said to the judge. "He's a good kid," Robert said finally. "He'll tell the truth." "That's what I'm afraid of," Elias replied. "What if the truth is that he'd be better off with a real family, with people who know what they're doing?" "You are a real family. That's what we've been showing them all morning." Sarah Chen appeared with 2 cups of coffee. "Drink this. You look like you need it." Elias took the cup, but couldn't bring himself to drink. His stomach was churning too much. Inside the judge's chambers, Samuel sat in a chair that was too big for him, his feet dangling above the floor. Judge Cordova had removed her robe and sat across from him in regular clothes, trying to be less intimidating. It didn't entirely work. "Samuel," she said gently, "I want you to understand that whatever you tell me stays between us, unless you give me permission to share it. And there are no wrong answers to my questions. I just want to understand how you're feeling. Can you do that for me?" Samuel nodded, clutching the wooden horse in his hand. "Tell me about living with your Uncle Elias. What's a normal day like?" Samuel thought for a moment. "We wake up early. Uncle Elias makes breakfast, usually oatmeal or eggs. Then I help with the chickens and we check on the cattle. Sometimes we ride Remington and Daisy. He tells me stories about when he and Papa were kids. At night he plays the harmonica, even though he's not very good yet. And Soldier sleeps in my bed. Do you have friends? Miguel at school. And Doc Martinez tells me jokes. And Miss Sarah gives me books to read. Do you miss your papa?" Samuel's eyes filled with tears. "Every day. But Uncle Elias says that's okay, that missing someone means you loved them, and love doesn't stop just because someone's gone." Judge Cordova made a note. "If you could live anywhere, with anyone, where would you choose?" "The ranch. With Uncle Elias." Samuel's answer came immediately, without hesitation. "Why? There's a family in Denver with other children. You could have brothers and sisters to play with, a bigger house, more opportunities, but they're not my family. Uncle Elias is my family. The ranch was Papa's home when he was little. It's where Papa wanted me to be. It's where I belong." Samuel looked down at the wooden horse. "Papa made this for me before he died. He made one just like it for Uncle Elias when they were kids. That means something. That means we're connected. What if something happens to Uncle Elias? He's getting older. What if he gets sick? Then Doc Martinez and Miss Sarah will help. That's what Uncle Elias says. That's what families do. Samuel's voice was steady despite the tears on his cheeks. Your Honor, Uncle Elias isn't perfect. He burns dinner sometimes, and he doesn't know how to braid hair, and he still doesn't understand my math homework. But he tries. Every single day he tries so hard. He does things that scare him because I need him to. That's what love is, right? Doing hard things for people you care about. Judge Cordova sat back in her chair, studying the small boy who spoke with such certainty. You're very wise for 5 years old. Papa said I had an old soul. I don't know what that means, but Uncle Elias says it means I'm thoughtful. Samuel wiped his eyes. Can I ask you something? Of course. Are you going to take me away from Uncle Elias? Would you be okay if I did? Samuel shook his head firmly. No, I wouldn't be okay. I already lost my mama and my papa. I can't lose Uncle Elias too. Please don't make me lose anyone else. Judge Cordova stood and walked to the window, looking out at the mountains in the distance. After a long moment, she turned back to Samuel. Thank you for being so honest with me. Would you like to go back to your uncle now? Samuel nodded eagerly. As he reached the door, the judge called out, Samuel, you can tell him what we talked about if you want to. When the courtroom reconvened, Judge Cordova took her seat behind the bench. Her expression was neutral, impossible to read. Elias felt his heart hammering against his ribs. I've reviewed the testimony, examined the evidence, and spoken with Samuel privately. She began. This is not a straightforward case. There are legitimate concerns about Mr. Thorne's age, his isolation, and his lack of parenting experience. Under normal circumstances, I might favor placement with a younger, more experienced foster family. Elias felt the world collapsing around him. However, the judge continued, these are not normal circumstances. This is a case about honoring a dying father's wishes, about family healing across generations, and about a child who has already suffered tremendous loss. Samuel is clear about what he wants. He's thriving in Mr. Thorne's care, and Mr. Thorne has demonstrated remarkable growth and commitment. She looked directly at Elias. Mr. Thorne, I'm granting your petition for permanent legal guardianship of Samuel Jacob Thorne with the following conditions. Continued counseling for Samuel, regular check-ins with Ms. Morrison for the next 6 months, and establishment of a legal backup guardian should anything happen to you. Do you accept these terms? Elias stood, his voice breaking. Yes, Your Honor. Thank you. Thank you. Samuel launched himself from his chair and wrapped his arms around Elias's waist, sobbing with relief. Elias held him, tears streaming down his own face, feeling the weight of 3 months of fear finally lift. Behind them, Doc Martinez and Sarah Chen were crying too. Robert Chen was smiling. Even Linda Morrison looked pleased, nodding with satisfaction. One more thing, Judge Cordova said, her stern expression finally softening. Mr. Thorne, keep practicing that harmonica. From what I hear, you need all the help you can get. Laughter rippled through the courtroom, releasing the tension. Elias managed a smile through his tears. Yes, Your Honor, I will. As they left the courthouse, the signed guardianship papers in Robert's briefcase, Samuel held tight to Elias's hand. The afternoon sun was warm on their faces, the sky impossibly blue. We did it, Samuel said. We're really a family now. We were always a family, Elias replied. The judge just made it official. They walked to the truck together, father and son in all the ways that mattered, ready to go home to the ranch where 3 generations of Thornes had lived and loved and learned what it meant to belong. 6 months after the guardianship hearing, Elias stood on the porch of the ranch house at dawn, a cup of coffee in his hands, watching the sun paint the canyon walls in shades of gold and rose. The morning was cool, carrying the first hint of winter on the wind. Behind him, inside the house, he could hear Samuel moving around in his room, getting ready for school. Soldier's nails clicked on the wooden floor as the dog followed the boy downstairs. So much had changed. So much had stayed the same. The leather journal sat on his desk now, filled with entries that documented a life transformed. Not just notes about cattle counts and weather patterns anymore, but observations about a child growing up, questions about parenting, reflections on patience and love and the daily work of becoming a father at 63 years old. The most recent entry, written last night, read, Samuel lost his first tooth today. He was so excited he could barely speak. We put it under his pillow for the tooth fairy, and I stayed up until midnight making sure I had cash to leave in its place. I'm learning that magic is real if you work hard enough to create it. Samuel came out onto the porch, backpack already on his shoulders, the wooden horse visible through the mesh pocket. He still carried it everywhere. But it was no longer a security blanket. Now it was simply a connection to his father, a reminder of where he came from. "Morning, Uncle Elias," he said, accepting the glass of orange juice Elias handed him. "Morning, son." The word still felt new in Elias's mouth. But Samuel never corrected him. They'd found their own language for what they were to each other, something that existed beyond simple labels like uncle and nephew. They ate breakfast together, the conversation easy and comfortable. Samuel talked about a science project he was working on, about how Miguel had invited him to a birthday party on Saturday, about a book Mrs. Rodriguez was reading to the class. Elias listened, asked questions, marveled at how normal it all felt after the upheaval of those first months. The drive to school took them through Tres Piedras, past Sarah Chen's store where they waved at her through the window, past Doc Martinez's clinic where the old physician was already seeing his first patient of the day. The town had embraced Samuel completely, watching him grow with a proprietary interest that small communities reserve for their own. At the school, Samuel climbed out of the truck but paused before closing the door. "Uncle Elias, you're still coming to the parent showcase tonight, right? Where I'm presenting my project. Wouldn't miss it for the world. What time should I be here?" 6 o'clock. "And wear something nice. Mrs. Rodriguez says parents always wear nice clothes to school events." Elias smiled. "I'll wear my courthouse suit." "How's that?" "Perfect." Samuel hesitated, then said what was really on his mind. "Do you think Papa would be proud of my project and everything?" Elias leaned across the seat so he could look Samuel in the eye. "Your Papa would be more than proud. He'd be amazed. You're doing things he never got the chance to see, becoming someone wonderful, and every day you're showing the world what it means to be a thorn. Yes, son, he'd be proud beyond measure." Samuel nodded, satisfied, and ran toward the school building where Miguel was waiting by the door. Elias watched him go. This small person who had changed everything, who had taken a lonely rancher and turned him back into a human being. The drive home took him past the canyon trail where it had all begun 6 months ago. He stopped the truck at the trailhead and got out, walking to the spot where the German shepherd had first blocked his path. The ledge where Jacob's wagon had crashed was visible in the distance, a scar on the landscape that would never fully heal but had stopped bleeding. "Thank you," Elias said to the wind, to the ghost of his brother, to whatever force had put that dog on the trail at exactly the right moment. "Thank you for trusting me. Thank you for giving me the chance to make things right." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a photograph, one that Sarah Chen had insisted on taking last month. It showed Elias and Samuel standing in front of the ranch house, soldier between them, all three of them smiling at the camera. Sarah had made copies, and one now hung on the refrigerator at home. Another lived in Samuel's backpack, and this one Elias carried with him always. He looked at it now, seeing not just who they were, but who they'd become. The man in the photo wasn't the isolated, bitter rancher who'd lived alone for 20 years. He was someone softer, opened up by love and responsibility and the daily work of showing up for another person. And the boy in the photo wasn't the traumatized, silent child who'd arrived 3 days after losing his father. He was healing, growing, finding joy again. That night at the parent showcase, Elias sat in a too-small chair and watched Samuel present his science project about the life cycle of desert plants. The boy spoke clearly and confidently, answering questions from teachers and other parents with the kind of poise that came from knowing he was loved and supported. When it was over, they walked to the truck under a sky full of stars. Samuel reached for Elias's hand, something he still did when he was tired or emotional or just needed the connection. "Uncle Elias," he said as they drove home through the darkness. "Yes? Do you remember when you asked me if I thought Papa could see us?" "From heaven, I remember. I think he can. And I think he's happy. I think he knows we're okay now." Elias's throat tightened. "I think so too." At the ranch, they found Soldier waiting on the porch, tail wagging in greeting. Inside, Elias made hot chocolate while Samuel changed into his pajamas. They sat at the kitchen table together, reviewing the day, making plans for tomorrow, existing in the comfortable rhythm they'd built piece by piece over 6 months. Before bed, Elias took out the harmonica and played "Oh Susanna" all the way through. He'd gotten better, much better, though he'd never be as good as Jacob. But that was okay. He wasn't trying to replace his brother. He was trying to honor him, to keep his memory alive for the son he'd left behind. Samuel listened from his bed, soldier curled against his side, the wooden horse on his nightstand next to the locket with his mother's picture. When Elias finished, the boy called out, "That was really good, Uncle Elias. Papa would have liked it." "Thank you, son. Good night. I love you." "I love you too." Elias stood in the hallway for a moment, listening to Samuel's breathing even out as he drifted toward sleep. Then he went downstairs to his desk and opened the leather journal one more time. Today, Samuel presented his science project, he wrote. He was confident and articulate, and completely himself. Afterward, he said he thinks Jacob is watching us and is happy. I believe he's right. Jacob gave me the gift of redemption wrapped in the responsibility of raising his son. I didn't know if I could do it, but day by day, we're figuring it out together. Some distances are measured in miles. Some are measured in years of silence. But the most important ones are measured in the small moments of connection, the daily choices to show up, to try, to love. Jacob crossed an impossible distance to forgive me. Now I'm crossing my own distance to become the man he believed I could be, for Samuel, for Jacob, for myself. He closed the journal and turned off the light. Outside, the desert was dark and quiet, full of ancient peace. Inside, the ranch house was warm with the presence of family. Sometimes the hardest journeys aren't in miles, but in years of silence and the courage it takes to bridge them. Elias Thorne had made that journey, and in doing so, he'd found his way home.